Welcome, gamers, to Basement Arcade Pause Menu, the show where we hit pause, sit back, and just chill. I'm your host, Ben Magnet, and today on the show, I have with me truly a very special guest. He is part of the International Art Collective. I'm pretty sure, I know I just read it 5 seconds ago. I might have got it wrong. He is definitely going to correct me when I bring him. But he is also the man who created this amazing art exhibit. If you've been to any sort of video game collection, either in Southern California, Portland, all over the country, he does this amazing thing called the Art of Nintendo Power. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Stephan Reese. Stephan, how is it going? And it's interactive art collection. God,
it's all right. It's okay. I stuck it on there just for you.
I am so glad that StreamYard just started doing that, because this wasn't a thing back when we started the show.
Yeah.
But I was like, I know it started with the I. And my brain just decided, like, you read this 5 seconds ago, but F you, you're going to forget what it is.
Yeah, no, you know what's funny is that IAC, the acronym, is like several other unrelated 501c3s are also IAC.
Uh-huh.
So like people get that mixed up all the time. It's fine. It's names. Doesn't matter. None of this matters.
What are names? What is a name? What is that? What is this? I don't know. But anyways, Stephan, it is an absolute honor to have you here. You are someone who I've seen the art exhibit, the Art of Nintendo Power, at multiple conventions, both in Portland, SoCal Gaming Expo when you were there. And every time I see it, I always get a little giddy, because Nintendo Power, as with many other gamers who grew up in the 80s and 90s and hell, even the 2000s, we all, especially us Nintendo gamers, we all have a very special connection to Nintendo Power. And since this is your very first time on the show, normally the question I ask for my first timers is, how did you get into video games? We'll get to that. But I want to know, because we're talking Nintendo Power, do you remember the first time you ever opened a Nintendo Power magazine?
Oh, I sure do. And you know what's
hell yes.
Yeah. So is it volume? I want to say it's 27. I know I'm going to be wrong. People are going to slay me for that. But it's the Super Mario World cover.
Okay.
I do everything like visually. I look at the art all day, every day. So I don't like, people are like, oh, you don't know the number for whatever. And I'm like, no, but I have the cover in my living room. So like, so I remember covers. I remember art. That's how I remember issues. But yeah, it was the Super Mario World cover. My grandmother had bought me that subscription, and yeah, I absolutely remember pulling that out of the mailbox for the first time. And you know, it's funny because I talk about this a lot. The nostalgia people have for this magazine is completely compartmentalized from nostalgia for video games, which is really interesting, because like I'll give an example. At a show last year, a woman had seen the Lemmings. I have the Lemmings cover for Nintendo Power. And she, upon seeing that, she just completely broke down and started crying. And it turns out that she also was gifted her subscription from a grandparent who had recently passed. And so there was this very, very visceral connection with that issue of the magazine. And I was talking to her a little bit, and she had never played Lemmings in her life. Like she had, like, it was just never, it was not a thing. And so, but because of that connection to the magazine, you know, people have these really visceral memories of like pulling issues out of the mailbox or flipping through them on their bed. And it's very event driven, whereas you don't get that as much sometimes with like MMOs and like things that are very like particular to a certain day or a certain event. You'll get those kinds of memories, but generally I find that you don't get that nostalgia of like, oh yeah, I remember playing, you know, Super Mario Brothers on this particular day, you know, around this particular holiday or whatever. Like it's nostalgia for video games tends to be a little bit more vague, whereas the nostalgia for the magazine, this one in particular, and I'm sure other magazines as well, it's very specific. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, my own personal history with Nintendo Power. I mean, the topic of the episode was going to be like video game magazines, but I'm like, I know I could talk about Nintendo Power all day, every day. I know I could just talk about Nintendo all day, every day. I'm representing Nintendo right now. I got my Legend of Zelda. Not only that, at the time of this recording, or at the day of this recording, just a little inside baseball here. I did a recording with a friend of mine earlier saying that I don't have the game Tears of the Kingdom. A few hours later, my best friend emailed me a code for Tears of the goddamn Kingdom, and it's loading on my Switch right now.
That's great. I'm you know what, it's funny, people are I'm getting flack for it on social right now, but I wasn't a big fan of Breath of the Wild, and so I'm not playing Tears of the Kingdom.
I'm kidding.
I don't particularly like the open world Zeldas. I think if it was called something different, I might like it better. But because I have like so much expectation and like a very, very specific requirements for me as to what creates a Zelda experience, that like the open world, especially the most recent open world stuff, just doesn't hit that like, oh yeah, that's a Zelda game to me, right? And so like you look, Link to the Past is one of my favorite games of all time. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's one of the greatest games ever made. But the newer stuff, like I don't know, like that top down experience is really sort of part of it for me. And so I would have probably liked it better if it was called something else. But
hey, no judgments here, bud. Yeah. Absolutely. Hey, I will always praise Link Between Worlds. If it wasn't for Link Between, it's my favorite Zelda. It's my personal favorite Zelda game. If it wasn't for Link Between Worlds, you and I probably wouldn't be here talking right now.
Or like the remake of the Game Boy game was phenomenal a couple years ago.
So I loved Link's Awakening. I loved that Switch port. It was, or that Switch remake. It was so good. Yeah, but anyways, let's put a pin in that, shall we?
Sure.
But yeah,
I tend to ramble.
Oh no, the good news about this show, Stephan, is that tangents, rants. That's what I'm trying to say. Essentially, if we just go off on a random thing, it's not just welcome; it's encouraged. So,
good. Well, then I'll fit right in.
Yes, you will. But going back to Nintendo Power, my own personal history with Nintendo Power came right after I got a Nintendo Wii for Christmas. And it was in one of the pamphlets that, because, when you get a brand new Nintendo console, especially back then, they had pamphlets for Nintendo Power, Club Nintendo, all a bunch of stuff. And I was looking at this, and my dad actually asked me if I wanted to subscribe, because it was like a free subscription with my Wii. And he said, hey, do you want to get this magazine? I'm like, hell yeah, I do. And I don't remember which was the first one that came to my house, but I do remember the first time I ever saw Nintendo Power, and it was at my local library of all places. My mom found it because it had Ash Ketchum on the cover, and it was a shot from the Pokemon anime, and it was talking about Pokemon. So I'm like, and I'm just a small child who's well into the Pokemon craze. Like, Pokemon has invaded my house, my life, everything at this point.
Sure.
In like 1990, whatever it happened. And I was just like, ooh, I want to see. I wasn't reading jack shit. I was just like looking through and seeing the pictures, seeing if there was new stuff coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame that, because it's funny because people ask me, if I have a full run of Nintendo Power, and honestly, I do not own every issue of Nintendo Power, because for me, my interest sort of starts to wane in the magazine when traditional art sort of went by the wayside. But that it's funny that you mentioned that Ash Ketchum cover, because presumably that's a cell, right, from the anime, and I would love to find that cell every once in a while, because like throughout most of the first like 80 issues, the covers were created for the magazine, specific art pieces specifically made for the magazine. But then as they transitioned away from traditional art, when you did get traditional art, it was usually key art sourced from something else, or a cell from a show or something like that. So occasionally I will find art well past that sort of like first 80 issue threshold of when it was all traditional artwork, and I'll find stuff because they sourced it from something else, and I'll find that something else. Like I have the poster for Superman 64 was a piece from the style guide for the Superman cartoon show. And so I found that piece of style guide art, and it just also happens to be the poster for Superman 64.
Nice.
So yeah.
Talk about I wouldn't say controversial, But talk about a game that definitely puts some ruffles some feathers. If you talk,
sure, it was terrible.
Yeah. But because every time I see the art of Nintendo Power at any convention, I always take pictures, and I'm just trying to flip through my phone. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of stuff organized on my phone very well. But honestly, one of the things that I saw, like what you said, because a lot of magazines, because when I had my subscription to Nintendo Power, it was all pre-rendered. It wasn't traditional. It was all 3D. I mean, when I was actually reading the art or reading the articles inside the magazine, sure, the information, the content was fantastic and awesome. But when I see stuff like this, and audio listeners, it's a cover of Super Mario Kart, the Nintendo Power cover of Super Mario Kart, which has Bowser throwing a banana at Donkey Kong, Mario, and a Koopa Troopa. I missed that.
Yeah.
And part of me is mad that even though I was alive during this era, I was so young and I wasn't really in video games that I didn't appreciate it at the time. And even another art, the piece that you bring around a whole lot, is the art for the Super Metroid Player's Guide.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
I absolutely, and last year or a few years ago when Metroid Dread came out, I played all the 2D Metroid games in preparation for Dread. And Super Metroid was an amazing ride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it really, look, at the time it was special that like desktop publishing had started to become a thing, and like you could create publications without the need of hand-drawn art, but at the same time you did lose the gravitas of this magazine. And to your point, like I think it was similar to like how when you're growing up, maybe it's different now, but at least when we were growing up, there wasn't this you didn't understand that the characters in the shows that you were watching were voiced by real people. That was just not something that you thought about. And now I think that the I get these incredibly strong reactions at shows because people never stopped to think that someone had to draw all of that or paint all of that, and that 30 years later, now it's 30 this year's the 35th anniversary of the magazine. No one thought that 35 years later any of it would still be around, that anyone would have kept it. So it really was a special thing that was almost entirely lost when the game industry went polygonal, because like basically as soon as all the games went 3D, so did the magazines. And at the time, 2D traditional art wasn't nostalgic or retro, it was just old. And so it took a little while for it to not be old anymore. But it is a shame that when the magazine stopped traditional art, that it just like stopped overnight, and it was just like almost completely gone from the magazine. It was not a slow transition. It was a very quick transition.
I believe it. And I mean, when I was a kid, especially, I'm pretty sure when I started really buying into, because even though Nintendo Power was one of the magazines on the racks, my household wasn't necessarily a Nintendo household. We had Game Boys, of course, but we didn't. Our first Nintendo like home console that we owned was either the NES that I got for Christmas when I told my dad I wanted a Super Nintendo, but he didn't hear Super Nintendo, he just heard Nintendo. It was either that or my N64, which by that point, everything in my house was like polygons, polygons, polygonal, 3D based games.
Yeah.
And the magazines that my brother and I were getting, we were getting PlayStation magazine. We were getting tips and tricks whenever we found a new one in the grocery store, begging our parents to buy us a magazine with a bunch of cheat codes in it. Nintendo Power was always there. And when I finally got my subscription to the magazine, I was really happy I got it because I loved flipping through it. I loved because there was more insight in there than the other magazines, because the other magazines like Game Informer, Tips and Tricks, and PlayStation, they were all either like, we got to branch out to everything, or with PlayStation, let's just branch out to what we have and then we'll just go from there. But Nintendo Power, I want to say is since it was one of the first, or at least it was one of the first that like stuck hard.
Mm-hmm.
It was like when I heard that Nintendo Power was no longer printing issues, that the last issue was going to be issue whatever. Part of me, it hurt a little bit, even though I wasn't a subscriber to the magazine anymore. But I was like, but no,
Yeah,
why?
same, right? I hadn't, and that the magazine stopped publishing long before I started all of this,
Oh,
and so it I had not even thought about the magazine for some time until I saw on because regular news outlets picked up Nintendo Power stopping publication. I mean, that just kind of shows what a cultural milestone
mm-hmm.
that publication is. So like CNN was picking up that that it was closing up shop.
Damn.
So I did go out and buy that last issue, like I think a lot of people did, but even having not thought about the magazine in a number of years.
Yeah. Especially when you were a kid and you see these video game magazines, you always think like, what do you hear that, EGM or like EGM is going under, or they're like other magazines like less like Tips and Tricks, when Tips and Tricks went under because they didn't need to publish any cheat codes anymore. The internet has all the cheat codes.
Sure.
They don't need to waste money in killing trees. It's like that makes sense. But in the back of my head, I want to say I probably took Nintendo Power for granted in ways, because I always thought it wasn't just new. It wasn't just like reviews of games. It wasn't just. I mean, obviously they were trying to help tell people like you should buy Nintendo products because of X, Y, and Z, but they went a little bit further than that. And even when I watch documentaries like on Netflix, like the High Score, when they do talk about the first issue, how Nintendo Power came to life, and when I talk to other friends,
Gail Tilden has a wonderful segment in that. I highly suggest it. If anybody, Gail Tilden, dear friend and editor in chief of Nintendo Power, she's wonderful, and she has a great segment in that documentary. So I highly suggest anyone go watch it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Even when I would talk to my buddy Patrick Brickhouse, who runs the Retro Blast podcast, when he was on my show, he would talk about how he beat Castlevania 2 and him and his friend because of Nintendo Power. He had a Nintendo Power.
Oh, sure. That's the only way you could. That's the only way you could beat it. Who the hell would kneel at the cliff for however long it is? No one. Zero people. Earthbound has a moment like that too, where behind the waterfall, you have to just like stand there. To get into the Master Belch's lair, you have to. I don't know if you've played Earthbound, but there's. Oh my God. Okay, well go play Earthbound. That's homework for you.
Earlier my previous guest and I, we were just talking about all the games we want to play. We're like, there's too many games. There's too many games.
Yeah, no. So that's homework for you. Play Earthbound. But there's a moment where, because the game came with a strategy guide, right? That's why the box is so big, and there's a moment where you have to. There's like a dude guarding a door behind a waterfall, and then he like won't let you in. But if you sit there, I think it's like 2 minutes. It's a significant amount of time for a little kid to not do anything. And if you have to sit there for like 2 minutes, and then the door just opens. And like the only way you would ever know that is if you had the strategy guide, which is interesting because it almost makes it a DRM in a way, or like copy protection, because like you wouldn't be able to figure that out on your own without that guide that came with the game.
Yeah, I don't think, even if you were to stumble across it just at an accident, what are the odds to, like, say you're playing Earthbound, you get to that spot and you're just sitting there, then your mom yells at you to go help you with something, you go, and all of a sudden you come back and the door suddenly
Door's
opens.
open.
What happened?
Yeah.
It's like, what happened? Did the dog push a button? I don't know. You're like the one kid in the schoolyard who was able to get past that part Earthbound, because everyone else is like, I've done everything. I don't know where to go next.
Right.
It honestly, it gives me the this is jumping companies for a hot second, but have you ever played Mega Man Legends 2?
Not in a hot minute, but
all right. Okay, yes. So you know that part in Mega Man Legends 2 where you get to the underwater dungeon and you need the drill arm to progress?
Yeah.
But in order to get the drill arm, you need this big ass gear that's hidden in this one certain box in the very beginning of the game.
I don't recall, but I believe you. That sounds
Do you
terrible.
want to know what a 12-year-old put over 40 hours trying to find that goddamn gear?
Oh, I
And
bet.
I was even yeah, the 12-year-old was me, but I was just determined to beat this game without the strategy guide, and I was checking everywhere except the one box it was in, and I did this stupid side quest to get 2 million in-game currency to buy this one weapon because I thought this is the weapon I need to get. Nope, totally different. Completely just not what I needed at all. And I finally caved and said, "Oh, it's here." I'm like, I was yelling at my computer screen. My mom comes in. She's like, "What's wrong? What's going on?" I'm just like, "Don't worry about it. It's nothing to do with you. It's all me."
It's
Yeah,
like giving you a complex. Like, what's wrong with me?
it was one of those things. It's like, what do I need? Because the Mega Man Legends games those are my favorite Mega Man games of all time. And I'm still mad at Capcom for Legends 3, and they won't give Legends more love.
Mm.
Uh, but I was just so mad that I couldn't find that stupid gear to progress the game. I just had to look in this one box it was the one box that I didn't look in. And ooh, I have never mixed that box ever since.
Yeah, sold a
Every
lot of
time
guides.
it's like, if there was like a PlayStation Power guide for it, I was like, hey, you
Sure.
need this for later. Make sure you check all the boxes in this. Like, just trust us, check them all. Even
Yep.
just a big hint like that, I would have saved me hours of pain and suffering.
Nope. Sorry, young Ben.
It's well, it didn't really. Once I finally found it out, I mean, yeah, I was upset, but also taught me a good lesson when I play RPGs. Check everything, and when I say everything, I mean everything.
That's right.
Talk to every NPC you find. Doesn't check every little nook and cranny. You never know.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just step away from the magazine and from the art exhibit for a hot second, and let's just talk about you. How did you get into video games? Was Nintendo your gateway into video games, or was it the arcades, or
Like
even Atari?
like as a kid, how I got
Yeah.
into games.
Mhm.
So I think I'm pretty sure we had a TRS-80 growing up, which is basically a Radio Shack personal computer back
Mhm.
when Radio Shack was a thing, and when Radio Shack was a thing. And so we had a TRS-80, and there was a game called Matterhorn Screamer, which was I'm pretty sure there are a couple things that could have been my first gaming experience, but I'm pretty sure this is the one, just from me being in my 40s and trying to remember young childhood stuff. But it was a game called Matterhorn Screamer, and it was basically a platformer with Goofy climbing the Matterhorn at Disneyland. And it was not particularly good, but it was the game we had. Right, that, and like, what else do we have for that stupid thing? Win, lose, or draw. Definitely had that. It might have actually just been those two. So I am fairly certain the TRS-80 happened because my dad was chief of police when I was a kid for the city we
Oh.
grew up in,
Mhm.
and he needed the computer for work. I think a lot of kids my age the ones who had personal computers did so because their parents needed them for work because they were so ungodly expensive.
Fun fact, my father's also retired law enforcement, and he came home with a computer. He claimed it was for work, but of course, my younger brother and I, we used it for video games.
Nice, nice. What do you do? Sorry, no,
Oh,
get out of here.
puppies.
Yes, this is my. Sorry, people, audio listeners. I have two large dogs in my office with me right now.
They're
Misbehaving.
adorable.
Thank you. Stop eating Piper's things, please. Anyway, so I'm pretty sure that was I'm almost certain that happened before the NES,
Mhm.
because I know I didn't have an Atari at the time. I got my first 2800. I got well after it was like in garage sales and stuff, because I'm pretty sure I picked it up from a garage sale or something like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I'm pretty sure it's that TRS-80 game, Matterhorn Screamer, and that was my entry point um, to gaming at large. And then I was also the first kid on the block to have an NES, And the only reason I remember that is because the other kids would, like, my parents were absolutely irate because the other kids on my block were just letting themselves into our house in the mornings and to play the NES, and I would wake up and there would be kids on my block already in my living room playing my NES when I woke up in the morning. So
bold.
But yeah, that's bold. That's how I got that was my entry point into gaming at large.
My God, that is something that sounds something just out of a 1980s movie.
Yeah. Yeah,
like
kids breaking into my house to play video games.
But just like kids just coming into your house, just like completely unannounced, playing your Nintendo, and you're just about to get ready for school. It's like, what does everyone do? It's like, or that Patrick meme from SpongeBob where he just sees all the eyes under his rock, and he's like, "Who are you people?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah. God, what was his name? There's one kid that I think his name was Jeff. That he was the one that was the biggest perpetrator of breaking into my home to play my NES.
Wow. And he knew. And did he know that your dad was a law enforcement at the time?
I don't think so. Like we were,
I was about to say, if he had known, I don't think he would have broken in. Because if I know of my parents' friends, if they were a law enforcement, and they're like, "Yeah, just come over anytime," like, I'm not coming over anytime. I'm knocking.
No,
I
think we were too young for it to matter or to register as it being a thing. Yeah.
Oh, but wow, you're the first kid with an NES, and everyone. I could only just imagine your mom being just like yelling at this kid, like, "What are you doing?" It's like,
yeah, they were not thrilled. I mean, and it was like, looking back too, it's like, because I thought I was making, like, I was stoked because, like, oh, I made a bunch of friends. Like, now as an adult thinking about it, it's like, okay, clearly they were just here to play the Nintendo.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah, well, thankfully we can look back on those kind of stories and laugh about it now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you grow up with an old TRS-81, or what was your old computer again?
TRS-80.
TRS-80,
otherwise known as the Trash 80.
Trash 80.
A lot of people call it the Trash 80.
I got close. I was one digit off. So you started with the TRS-80, the first kid on the block to get a Nintendo, and that's how it snowballs. That is, and of course you get your first ever Nintendo Power. So let's go to the magazine. Oh,
my first exposure to Nintendo Power wasn't that first issue. It wasn't. It wasn't the Super Mario World issue. I got exposed much earlier. On the playground at school, there was a kid named Mitchell Swan, and he had a subscription, and he would let me borrow his issues. And I think it's the Metal Storm issue was the first one that I ever actually opened and read. And what's interesting too is my exposure to Nintendo Power was really because they had a section in Nintendo Power that would like they'd go to developers and like have little like vignettes in the back about actually making games. And I didn't know, making games was a black box for most people back then. Like, it was just this like mystical thing that people were doing in Japan. Like, there wasn't there was no degrees or any career paths. It's just the people who were making games like seemingly just figured it out, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people did. But reading those vignettes in the back of Nintendo Power was what got me interested in wanting to go into the game industry. And I've worked in the game industry for the last 20 years, and it was due to that exposure around fourth grade that I decided that that's what I wanted to do. I was like, I don't know how this works. I don't know how I do this, but this is what I want to do with my life. And so yeah, as early as fourth grade, I knew I wanted to make games because of Nintendo Power Magazine.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I love doing this show and talking to people like you is just hearing these wholesome stories, is like how you found your calling through video games and through Nintendo Power and stuff like that. I was like, man, when I was a kid, I was just lucky just to play video games.
Yeah.
And just like you said, it was a mystical process. I just thought, I give money, I get game. That's how it works. I don't know things.
Yeah, and it's I count myself very lucky because very few people get to actually say that they do for a living what they said they would do for a living when they were in the fourth grade.
I don't want to
That's
know. I don't even
that's
remember.
that's
Yeah,
exceedingly rare.
I don't even remember what I said I wanted to do when I was in fourth grade. Probably something silly. I don't know. I want to go to
For a
be an
while,
astronaut.
before that, I wanted to be a cartoonist, and then realized I had absolutely no natural aptitude for drawing, and gave that up pretty quick.
Well, you're working with video games, and you have and you work with an amazing exhibit. Now let's go back towards the art of Nintendo Power and the interactive art collection. How did that start? Like how did the art of Nintendo Power, you collecting these pieces, how did that begin?
Well, I should probably take a further step back and talk about my journey into collecting at large, because that
Okay.
sort of like dovetails into this.
Oh yeah, let's go.
So, and this is the beginning of the story is a little bit harrowing, so I apologize in advance. It does involve cancer and death, but trigger warning there. But so my wife at the time and mother of my child was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer. And so at the time, I was looking for something that to distract myself, right? Because like this was consuming every spare moment I had, and I just needed something to do. And at the time, I had actually amassed a really significant toy and comic book collection that like I had kind of gotten to the sort of my definition of done for that collection. And so I find that when that happens with collections, a lot of times it stops being this like living, breathing thing that you're feeding, and it just becomes this weight around your neck. And it's just like, great, like now I have all this stuff, and I'm done. Like, what do I do with all of this stuff? And so so I had this piggy bank essentially of a collection that I could then liquidate and put into something else. And that's what I ended up doing. So it had always sort of been that childhood, that childhood thing of, oh, I wonder what it would be like to have every Nintendo game ever made, and I'm like, that would be kind of fun, like maybe that's something I could do. And I was already working in the industry and stuff like that. So yeah, I delve headfirst into collecting video games. And at the time I had like a shoebox collection of Super Nintendo games or whatever, just a handful of things that I'd kept from my youth. But I started like just going to brick and mortars, and I live in Southern California, and we have a lot of brick and mortars. And so it was like I'd have a route that I would go like for like I think it was like something like 14 stores or something like that, where I could be in a different retro game store every day for like 2 weeks, and then just complete the cycle over and over again. And I was just doing that. And so I decided I was going to do Super Nintendo first, because that was my really sort of passionate love as far as console gaming was concerned. And I ended up doing the full North American set in 2.5 months, because
Holy shit.
I had this piggy bank of a collection, and I had like this drive to like not want to like think about what was going on in my life, and I had regionally the accessibility of like all these game stores. And so I maybe probably pulled the eBay trigger on like less than 10% of that, but because most of it was just like going out and like doing it in stores. So anyway, so I ended up doing, there's Piper. I ended up doing 10 North American sets before I decided like, well, eventually it was 12, but 10 before I decided to branch out. And in a relatively short order. And so like, I kind of decided after a while that like especially like after I'd done Super Nintendo and Genesis and like the big, you know, sort of like really nostalgic collections, I was like, you know, at the point where I was like getting like an entire, you know, like a full set of GameCube and a full set of like Dreamcast and like this and Turbo Graphics and consoles I had never had before and like you know 3DO um and I was like, you know what, like I enjoy the chase more than I enjoy having these things more often than not. And so
Yeah.
I was like, so like it became apparent to me that collecting video games now, of course, like with like the sealed graded thing, and it was a different time. But
Yeah.
back then it was like game collecting was not hard. It was just expensive. And if I wanted to have a game, I could have it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, you know, if I'm willing to spend the money, I can have the thing. And I'm like, that's not particularly compelling. And so, especially again, and you know, my wife was continuing to progress, and you know, just so I'm not burying the lead, she does eventually pass away. Um, but um she was continuing to progress and I was still like really like wanting that hunt, wanting that focus, wanting that, you know. And so I was like, okay, so games aren't hard, they're just expensive. So what's harder than that? I said, okay, how about point of sale displays? And so I started collecting signs and standees and, you know, fiber optic signs and neon signs. And this was like, you know, now, you know, some of these fiber optic signs are like, you know, $10,000, which is ridiculous. That, you know, when I was collecting them, you know, the most expensive sign that I could think of was my big um, uh, KB Toys World of Nintendo. It's like a 6 foot long fiber optic sign. Um, and that was $2,000, which, you know, I'm not gonna like say it's not a lot of money, but like in context, it was not a lot of money to now. And but yeah, so I was like, okay, like point of sale displays, that's really really interesting. And so, but then I had gotten to the point relatively quickly with that stuff too, where like I didn't have everything, but I had the stuff that I wanted, right? And like, you know, with space being such a premium when it comes to signs and standees and that kind of stuff, um, I just gotten to the point where it's like, okay, I have what I want. Like, so what's the next harder thing? And while I was thinking about this, I was flipping through uh a Nintendo Power magazine. And in Nintendo Power #1, the first thing that you see when you open the front page is an ad for the Gameplay Counselor hotline. And it was at that point, at that time, it was branded the Power Line. But so in that ad, there was these kids that are actors. They're clearly not actual counselors, but they were wearing these jackets. And I was like, huh, I wonder if those jackets actually exist. And uh, so then I was like, hey, how hard would it be for me to find a Nintendo gameplay counselor today? And so I was looking through issues on Nintendo Power, and I was like, oh, well, they give me a name and they give me a photo of what these counselors look like. And like that's really like some of them didn't use their real names, but the ones who did, like that was their name and that was their actual photo. And I was like, okay, well, really the hard part now is going onto social media and figuring out what these people look like 30 years later. And so, and then once I found one person, like it was a web, right? The more people I found, because generally a lot of those counselors like would talk to each other and kept in touch with each other. So like using like the mutual friend system, like the more friends I had who were counselors, the more counselors I could find, and it would just spider and spider and spider and spider to the point where I then like introduced myself to you know, several hundred counselors. And so so through that process, it was funny because I did find those jackets, and I found a number of other jackets, but oftentimes it was more of like a, hey, I don't have the jacket you're looking for, I don't have the thing you're looking for, but I have this award, or I have this paperwork, or I have the box that I packed my desk into on my last day and then threw that in my garage, and it's been sitting in there for 30 years, but it's still there. Like, and so then I would be like, hey, can I buy that box? Like, sight unseen, just like sell me whatever was in your desk your last day. Right. And so so the other big piece, the interactive art collection, not only is the world's largest collection of original art for Nintendo Power Magazine, it is also the world's largest archive of Nintendo gameplay counter memorabilia, and not on accident. And so so during that process, I had met a guy, and he became a very close friend, Jeff Hazard, and he was a Nintendo gameplay counselor. And he's like, look, man, I don't have anything left over from my counselor days, but after I was a counselor, I was an artist for Nintendo Power Magazine, and I do have some of that. Would you be interested? And like, it was this very like comic book or a cartoon moment where like the camera zooms into the through your skull into your brain, and it shakes a minute and just explodes. It had never, and I alluded to this earlier, it had never occurred to me that someone drew all that art and that some of it might still be around. And so then same thing with counselors. From that one contact, that one artist, I was able to grow an incredible network in pretty quick order, because like, for the most part, I'd known art collectors, and like, but the Nintendo Power pieces that the existing art collecting community had were usually on accident, where they would be looking for covers for games or art from like the cover art for the boxes. They would be looking for that stuff, and then occasionally one of those artists would have also also painted for Nintendo Power. And so there was a couple collectors that had a few Nintendo Power pieces, but no one was out there specifically looking for Nintendo Power art at the time. And wow. So I, in a very short, or within, I had, before anyone, because I wasn't being very public about this, because like I didn't want to like create my own competition. Now right. I'm so invested in it that like it's easier to talk about, because like generally I've either already canvassed it, or I'm already in the social network of artists enough that like I don't need to worry about competition as much. But before, I had 100 pieces before anyone knew I had one. And now 4 years later, 4 years later, I'm at 356 pieces of original art from Nintendo Power Magazine. But yeah, that's sort of how that happened, as far as like deciding to collect art, because like it was very much a moment where I was like, oh, like this is the end game. Like I want to collect rarer and rarer things, and nothing, like every single thing I'm finding now in this niche is literally one of one. Like when I have a piece of art, that's the only one. Like it doesn't get any more rare than just being the thing. And so I was like, this is it for me. This is the space that I want to be in. I want to collect, historically relevant artifacts and things that are, one of one in nature. My friends joke saying that like, oh, if they made two, I'm not interested. Right? Like generally, what I do say is that if it's for sale, if it was ever for sale, I'm not interested. Like
Okay.
that's generally like my line, is whether or not it was like retail.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only thing that really gets close to being an exception to that rule is like some of the like catalog stuff from Nintendo Power Magazine, the stuff they sold in the catalog.
Yeah.
I like that stuff just because it's fun.
Like
But
the Toys R Us, or like the air quotes solid gold controller that they had for the N64, something like that.
yeah. There was a quarterly catalog that they
Mm-hmm.
sent, in the magazine, and you could buy things specifically from the magazine, and actually the Nintendo World Championships cartridges were one of those things. I think.
Oh, what I would not give to have one of
No,
those
okay,
on
so
me.
no, the gold one was a giveaway, but they sold the Star Fox competition cart and the Donkey Kong Country competition cart were both
Okay.
sold in that catalog. But yeah, so then I was at this point where it's like, okay, like what's the next step? Like, because I felt like I was close to my final form, but I wasn't quite there yet. And I realized that like having all of this like really historically relevant material and keeping it for myself was absolutely pointless. And no shade, honestly, like collect how you want to collect. Like I do understand there are people out there with collections in basements that they will lock away forever and no one will ever know. Like, not my favorite that's true, but also I'm just in no position to ever, like, I will, same thing with like, I never besmirch people who choose to collect sealed graded games. Um, Not for me generally, but collect how you want to collect. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
like that is a slippery slope that I'm not willing to navigate. Right. So
I'm too broke to navigate that slope.
yeah. But I just mean that like I'm never gonna tell someone that like the way that they're collecting is wrong. That's just not something I'm interested in doing. But anyway, so I was trying to figure out like what the final form here was, and I was like, oh well, like why don't I just start showing it to people, like, and not and then thinking about how I was like, well, I want to do a museum. That seems to be where I want to go, but like brick and mortar is too expensive. Like to have a brick and mortar museum, you really need financial backing, and like unless you're like the Strong
Mm-hmm.
or like these very very large well-funded museums, it's going to be a struggle to get a brick and mortar. So the Interactive Art Collection is a 501c3 nonprofit art museum. You can absolutely donate to us and write it off on your taxes, and maybe someday someone will donate me a building, and that's technically feasible.
Yeah.
And then we'll have our brick and mortar. But until then, I've chosen to just sort of piggyback on the backs of existing conventions, and share our work that way. And it's been absolutely wonderful so far. And this sort of is my final form. I wanna share this work for as long as I can physically do it.
Yeah, and what I love about the art of Nintendo Power specifically is that obviously almost every gamer alive knows about Nintendo Power in some way, shape, or form.
Sure.
But when we talk about the magazine, we mostly talk about what was inside the magazine, like the cheat codes. The like, oh, I found like that. I found out my favorite game because they had a preview of it in Nintendo Power magazine, or like Castlevania 2. Some friend people beat Castlevania 2 because of the Nintendo Power magazine. But with your exhibit specifically, it shines a light that I feel gets overshadowed a lot of times, and it's the classic art.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I want to say it was the one in Portland. I think that was the last convention I saw you, or I saw the exhibit at.
That was the last show we did.
And what? And you did, if I am I remembering correctly, did you have panels or like comic strips from the Super Mario Brothers? What's
Howard
up?
Nestor. Yeah,
Yeah, that's the
we
one.
have some Howard Nestor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have like sketches of comic strips. You have sketches of what the final of the final cover are. You had some sketches of like the Darkwing Duck cover, and of
Mm-hmm.
course my personal favorite, the Super Mario Kart, the Super Metroid stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I see the exhibit at a convention, I always I have to look through it because why not? But also, I feel like every time I go, I see something new. And you said you had like 300 some pieces,
Yeah,
and I
that's on
know,
purpose.
and I'm about to say is like, is there like a rotation on what kind of art pieces that you bring,
There
or is
is.
okay?
So there's some, about half of that exhibit is going to be permanent because it's
Okay.
like final paintings for covers and things like
Hmm.
that. Like people will always want to see that stuff, right? And so there is probably 25 pieces. So basically right now, usually it's me um and my friend Chris, Read the Game Shark, or Cheap Games. I'll give him a plug. He does the convention circuit as well, and sells Japanese import games. But he is my primary my road buddy for exhibits, and so usually it's just two of us and a U-Haul, and so um generally that means that I can do about 50 frames. Now, for those of you at home who haven't seen my frames, sometimes with interior art, that doesn't mean, so one frame does not mean one piece of art,
Right.
because like a lot of times there'll be like a spread for like for instance, I'll bring up one that comes to mind is The Zombies Ate My Neighbors. I have every piece of art for that entire spread, and it was like 5 pages or something like that. So I have, it's probably off the top of my head 12 pieces of art that are in a single frame, along with, I also, anytime I frame something, I frame it with the published piece, so that it makes a clear connection as to what you're actually looking at. And so yeah, I can do about, with the two of us, I can do about 50 frames per exhibit. And so I'm able to cycle them out. And sometimes, I used to get new pieces all the time, but now I've sort of saturated myself to the point where like anything that I'm finding now is like a real effort to find. And so, or it's something like, sometimes it comes to me, right? That's one of the reasons why I make myself so findable on social
Hmm.
media, is that occasionally some things, someone will come to me and offer me pieces. Art of Nintendo Power is not an accident. For if you search for Nintendo Power art on Google, I will sort higher than Nintendo does.
Oh.
So that's very purposeful SEO. So I'm incredibly findable, and so sometimes I will have genuinely new pieces at a
Hmm.
show. Usually, just out of vanity, I want to like show the newest stuff. Um, but I also just cycle work out, to your point, because again, I can only do about 50 frames, and so that's usually about 100 pieces on
Hmm.
average, depending on the frames.
But still, 50 frames, especially when I saw you at Portland. I don't want to say, because when I first met you, it was at SoCal Gaming Expo, and I want to say it was like 2017, 2018. It was a long time ago.
Hmm.
It was definitely pre-pandemic, because I saw you there, and then when I saw you again at Portland, I don't want to say the Art of Nintendo Power is like scooched over to like, it's like, you get your little quarter. I mean, you have a sizable space because you have a bunch of frames, and also space for people to walk through. But what I loved about the Portland is that not only were you in outside of the main vendor hall where people are hustling, bustling, trying to wheel and deal, but you were also sharing a room with the Video Game History Foundation as well,
Yeah.
and their exhibit for Pac-Man.
Yeah. Frank and Kelsey are a wonderful pair. If you don't support the Video Game History Foundation, please do. They are another 501(c)3 nonprofit who supports the archiving and historical preservation of video games. But and I do a lot of work with them,
Mm.
both professionally and personally. And so yeah, usually anytime they're setting something up, and it's within my driving range, because sometimes they are able to fly stuff, but like with me with the frames, like I refuse to, I will never ship any of
Hmm.
those, just from a liability standpoint.
Oh yeah.
And so like, and this is not my full-time job, right? This is just something that I do my full-time job so I can afford to do this job, right?
Oh
um
yeah.
but
I
but
know that struggle.
I still have to compete with my day job, and so that's why I've really only done West Coast conventions, or a couple states in. Like, it has to be driving distance basically from Southern California for me to be able to do it, because I can't just take 9 days, because if I did like an East Coast show, that would take me 3 days to drive it, and so like I do 3 days driving, and then 3 days for the exhibit probably, and then 3 days back. Like, minimum of 9 days is a lot to take out of my vacation time when I also have a family, and I also, it's just like, but yeah, to your point, I love, like, so the smaller shows sometimes won't have dedicated space for me, but it is definitely a very different feel when they do, because like when I'm in a vendor hall, there's an assumption that that these pieces are for sale, and that they're probably prints, and like people already struggle to. That's actually why I frame things with the published piece, because it's easier for you to wrap your head around the fact that this is the original art for this thing that you're looking at, right? When I'm in a vendor hall, people just kind of assume that like somehow I've recreated these pieces and I'm selling them. And so it's a very different feel, and I'm answering a lot more silly questions when I'm out on the vendor floor. If I have my own space, which I think the next place that I'm going to be that I will have that is Game On Expo in Arizona, in August, I think. But I will have my own room there, and
awesome.
And that's a very different feel, because then I can control the lighting, I can control the music, I can control, there's a lot of things I can control to make it feel more like a museum experience.
You could also make sure the AC is cranked out to max, because Arizona in August.
Yes, yeah. Well, and the convention. So I did that show last year, and it was an amazing experience. And I'm really looking forward to it again. And they've been nothing but wonderful to me too. So
that's awesome. I mean, and that's out in Phoenix, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, probably like greater Phoenix area. I should see if I can make out, because make it out there, because the only out of state convention I've ever been to was Portland. Because like you, I'm here in Southern California. I also have a full-time job and day job, and that is very competitive to what I do outside, and it's really hard for me to like pick certain days and get time off to go anywhere or do fun stuff outside of my area. But
it is in Phoenix. It's the Phoenix Convention Center, and it is August 11th through 13th.
All right, that's not too bad. Phoenix isn't that bad of a drive.
No, I mean it's short enough that we are able to drive it in one sitting.
Yep, and it just gets hot out there, but that's the desert, and that's California. We get hot too.
Honestly, Portland is a much more challenging drive for us.
I bet.
I think it's 17 hours.
Yeah,
and usually we drive it straight through. Like, one of us will just drive until like we can't anymore, and then we'll switch.
No, my family, we would take road trips to Montana when I was younger, and I know that feel, bud. That just going that high up the United States it's a grueling drive.
Yeah, thankfully I love it. It helps if you love it.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially for Portland, because when I went to Portland, that was my first ever time going to Portland. I only have ever heard about it, and I must say it did not disappoint. I walked in there my first day, and I just saw how big the arcade area was. I was like, I'm home.
Yeah, Portland is a wonderful show, and they are, again, they are one of the shows, much like Game On, that really understand my mission and understand the importance of what I'm doing, and like have been nothing but supportive.
That's awesome. Now, earlier you were talking about the chase, about how when you were collecting games, the chase was better than having it. I completely understand that hunger. Is that thrill of the chase there with the art of Nintendo Power? Because I know you said that sometimes pieces come to you and you're not even looking for them. But do you hear a rumor, or you get like the scent of a piece is like, or are you kind of like this might be a bad analogy? Are you kind of like that one actor at the end of Dracula Untold, where he goes, "The game is on," or like you're about to hunt down for a new piece? Is the chase still there?
Well, so It is, but it's extraordinarily different because with things that, when you're hunting for things that shouldn't exist, that's a very different process than just like hunting for a effing. Can I swear on the show? Okay. It's very different than hunting for a fucking game, right? Like, and so, and it requires usually an absorbent amount of patience. Because a lot of times there are probably, think about it, probably 20 pieces right now that I want, that I know where they are, that are safe, usually in the hands of the artist or one of their families, because let's face it, is now getting enough long enough in years that like I'm finding some artists via their obituaries. It's just it is what it is. And so sometimes it's a child of that artist will have something and they'll be like, look, I'm just not interested, or I'm not ready to sell. And that's very much um it's all about building relationships now. It has very little to do with the actual thing, right? Like if I go out and say, I'm going to go find this thing, I will fail 100% of the time. It's more about just finding people and just seeing who they know, what they remember, what they might have kept. And but it's not, the goal is never, I'm going to approach this person and I'm going to walk away with the thing. It's never that. It's always, I'm going to go to this person, and by the time we're done talking, they will understand that when the time comes, if the time comes, and if it doesn't come, that's fine too. But when the time comes, we are the best home for their artifacts, and that we value legacy, and that we value the history, and that like all of these things, like money is the last thing that we value in this process, right? And being a 501c3, it's actually physically legally difficult for me to sell things out of the collection. It's a process, which is why I honestly keep my personal collection and the museum collection very separate entities. But because sometimes I will sell things personally to fund the museum. That happens a lot, actually. But yeah. So it's just like, yes, usually when I find something, it's just different, because usually when I find something, I wasn't expecting to find that thing. Like I was just hunting for things. Like I call it doing research. I'll have a research day where I'll just basically sit at my computer and I will look for people using various methods. And like on research days, if I find if I find a name, like that's good enough, right? That's progress. So it's a super, super different process with very, very different goals. So there's not I'm never going to be done when you're looking for historically relevant items. I'm never going to be done. So the chase is different because there's not a goal, like a macro goal that I am charging toward. It's just moving forward. And so it's a super, super different process. Like, yes, I love the hunt, but I love the moments like there's no moments of completion. And so like, but the awe-inspiring moments that I get are like when I find something that absolutely should not exist. Like there's no reason, or like the things that had to have happened for that thing to still survive 35 years later. Like the calamity of happenstance that had to happen for this thing to be in my hands, like that recognition is what makes my jaw drop. Or things like, I have a collection of map books from Nintendo gameplay counselors, and these are the books that they used to help kids through calls like every day. And so like the history of pieces like that radiate from these things, like in a very intangible way. And like, so like finding things like that is very humbling, but it's very different than like the aha, I got the thing and now I have the set. And like, you know, it's like there's that those are very fleeting. That's like a dopamine hit, right? Where it's just like, I mean, I kind of I described it earlier when I was talking about like my action figure collection that I had sort of like met the definition of done. The moment that I was like, bloop, last thing, like put that thing on the shelf and now I have everything. There was like this like exhalation of like, wow, that's a thing I just did. And then immediately afterwards, it's hollow, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, okay, so I did the thing and now I have to find something else to do, right? So like meanwhile, like like I have in my living room, I've got under glass, I have the Wily ship from the Mega Man 2. You've probably seen it if you were the Portlings, the big red football ship.
I don't know why the hell I didn't take a picture of it, but I remember seeing the clay Wily ship with Mega Man. I was like, that's really cool, because obviously the first cover of Nintendo Power was a clay Mario for Mario
every
2.
single time I've had that in the collection now for almost 5 years, and every single time I walk by that thing, I smile. Like that's not the awe and the like moments of like gratitude and just those very humble moments are not those like immediate dopamine hits like it was when I was just collecting retail games.
Yeah. Essentially, the way you're describing you finding these pieces and obviously and adding to the collection, it makes me think of like these two very different characters. One of them is Indiana Jones, and whereas like we're talking about holding the map books from the guide counselors, I had like an Indiana Jones finding the Ark of the Covenant moment for a split second. I wasn't even in the room, but I thought to myself, if I could have like held those books and just like flipped through it without having my face melted off, that would be nice. I would be like, these need to be saved. Like those need to be preserved, because even though I technically was alive during this era, but as a video gamer, as someone who does appreciate video game history, that is like someone put their blood, sweat, and tears into making those books. Yeah. Nintendo didn't give them out. The guide counselors had to make them.
They sure did.
And the fact that you have some of them, I'm like, I want to flip through them so bad. It's just like, look at these beautiful pages, and you have that sort of collection, that like this great collection where people should see it and we appreciate it, compared to like the main villain from the Pokemon 2000 movie who just wants to collect stuff because he likes it.
Yeah.
He's like, I collect things. I started my collection with the Ram U card. Now I'm going to collect the 3 legendary birds. Lol.
Yeah. Had I not had that final realization of like, okay, now it's time to share all this stuff, I probably wouldn't be collecting the things that I collect now. Like I just, it is so much about, it's so much less about having the thing and so much more about sharing the thing.
Yeah.
And that's really that is the final form, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure.
Especially with a magazine that with so many gamers nowadays have such deep history with, or such deep nostalgia with, the fact that you're keeping these pieces preserved and you're showing them off and people can come look at them. I think I'm not a very religious person, but you're doing, if I were to say you're doing the Lord's work, I would say you're doing gamer Lord's work in a way of showing these pieces, because you're right, these could have been lost to time. These artifacts could have been,
and honestly, a lot of stuff is like that's the thing that's one of the driving. Just sorry to cut you off, but
that's right.
There's a voice in the back of my head that spurs me along every day that says, hey, every day, every moment that you're not finding something, it's being thrown in the garbage, so you better go find it. Like that's, and because it is like, for instance, I have she's a dear friend now, but Wendy Salvatore was the one of the editors the layout artists for Nintendo Power Magazine, and so like she was doing paste ups. Like so she was they called them paste ups because they were literally done with glue sticks. The way that a page was constructed in Nintendo Power is they would physically cut out the asset and or the block of text, and they would paste it together by hand and then photograph that thing, and then that's how you would create your page, is by printing the photograph. And so she had thousands of pages of layouts, the actual physical paste ups. She had thousands of pages, and a couple years before we met, she showed them to her kids and said, "Hey, look, this is a thing that mommy did. Isn't that fun?" And they're like, "Yeah, okay, whatever, mom," like not really caring. And she recycled all of them.
Nah.
Again, nothing against her, right? Like it was her job, right? And again, that's why I say there's like a calamity of errors that has to happen for these things to survive, because like the Wiley ship, that thing is larger than a regulation football. And so like there is no reason why a contract artist would have kept that for 35 years. It was like a very specific set of circumstances that allowed that thing to survive. And so like, I mean, it's the same thing. Like like I said, I've worked in games for 20 years, and like the amount of discs, builds, or people would call them prototypes, probably incorrectly, but people would call them prototypes today. The number of prototypes that I've had on my desk and fed into a shredder, because that's what we were supposed to do we just mulch these discs after we're done with them. You know, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of prototypes and like development hardware and all of that. But it was just my job. Like, so no, I didn't save much of that. And so that's what makes one of the big challenges here in collecting the art, is that this was just a job for a lot of these people. And of course they didn't keep this stuff. Why would they think to keep this stuff?
Right. And even, I mean, obviously, like having the page layouts for Nintendo Power in the right audience, that's a gold mine. In your brain, that's like, once again, Ark of the Covenant, to bring the Indiana Jones analogy back. But I could definitely see, like, for some young kids who don't really know what Nintendo Power is, they're like, that's cool, I guess. And
yeah,
I completely understand. Yeah. Even when when I go through my own things, or I think back to like the exact moment of when I had like say a toy, or just like an act, or just like some piece, or even games even, and I decide to sell them, and then years later I go, damn it, shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Because Ben that back then was in very different circumstances than present Ben. So obviously it's just one of those things, like, man, I wish I didn't do it, but at the same time, I get it. I 100% understand why.
Also, and I say it much more delicately when I'm talking about, people's estates and their legacy, but the TLDR is generally your children do not want your shit. That and so that's why, like, even people who I approach and they're like, I'm not ready to sell, or I want it to go to my children or whatever, I'm like, okay, that's fine, but let's make a plan. Let's at least make a plan, so that if something happens and your kids, like, write my email address on the back of something, or like just like let's make a plan, so that if something happens, that we get the phone call, right? Instead of it going to a yard sale, instead of it going into a dumpster, right? Like, let's just make sure that there's a plan. Sometimes it's, I'm in a number of people's wills, right? That like when they pass, X thing goes to the interactive art collection, right? Because again, your children don't want your shit. And like, even like my dad recently, a year ago now, has passed at the age of 92. We should all be so lucky. But I thought growing up, like, I would want more of his stuff, right? But like, we were going through it, and like, I kept 3 rings, and I think it's right here. Yeah, 3 rings and this knife is all that I kept out of my dad's 92-year collection of stuff, right? That's all I wanted, was 3 rings and this knife. And so the presumption, that's why again, no wrong way to collect. If people want to collect for their children, fine. Usually I think that's kind of an excuse, but whatever. But I think a lot of these collectors who are saying like, oh yeah, I'm doing this for my children, are going to find out that their children are not particularly interested. So, just be careful.
I mean, I don't have kids, but when I bought this game right here, I bought it for me, and it's gonna stay for me. Audio listeners, I'm holding up my DS copy of Chrono Trigger,
which is, by the way, the best way to play Chrono Trigger.
And like, even when you were saying, I pulled this game up when you were talking about the chase earlier, because I was hunting this game down, and I was scouring eBay, and I was in a bid war for it. I won it. I actually paid less for it than I thought I was going to pay. I paid $75. I think only like $3 shipping and handling. Only bummer is that the case itself is kind of, but the game works. It's a legit copy. It has the poster. All the insides are in there. And it's just like, when I finally look at this, like when I tell my friends and other collectors who have a Chrono Trigger, and when I tell them the type of copy I have, the second I say, oh yeah, it has the poster, their eyes go, what?
Yeah, first print. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. First print.
Yeah,
part of me just thought about maybe putting that poster in a frame and sticking it up here, but I'm like, nah, it's probably gonna stay in here for a while. At least until I finally play the game. I've owned this game for well over a year, and I still haven't sit down and played it. It's not because I don't want to. It's just time. Time is a factor.
Now I know that was the whole like your kids don't want your crap thing was a tangent. What were we talking about?
We were talking about the chase, but I want to shift gears just a little bit.
Sure.
But so you have over 300 pieces, like 350 pieces in the Art of Nintendo Power right now. This might be a bad question, but I got to know, is there one piece in your collection in particular that's your absolute favorite?
I don't know that I could get down to one. I could get down to like a few.
That works. Let's go with that.
The Wily ship is incredible. Absolutely incredible. And again, due to its size and it being its delicate nature, like there are a couple pieces that I go, there's literally, because like flat pieces of art, fine, I get like someone could have like put that in a flat file and it could have sat there for 30 years. That makes sense to me. The clay stuff does not make sense to my brain as to how it survived 35 years before it got to me. So like just from a like, again, that like radiating history, the clay stuff and specifically that Wily ship is definitely a favorite. The Castlevania 4 oil painting is astounding. I don't know if it was at Portland. It was right next to, in a very large frame, right next to all of the clay figures. And it's Simon Belmont swinging through the darkness on a chain. If for those of you who are familiar with that issue, and it is the only oil painting, to my knowledge, ever painted for the magazine. Normally it's done in it's usually like airbrushed acrylics. The vast majority of the covers are airbrushed acrylics or photographs of real things. But that is, to my knowledge, the only oil painting done for Nintendo Power magazines. Certainly the only oil painting for a cover. But that is a favorite. Those are probably my top two. There are a couple covers that are very special to me. All of my Dan McGowan covers. Dan McGowan, he passed away in 2010, and I worked through his estate to be able to acquire his work. The Mickey's Magical Quest and Secret of Mana and Lemmings, and there's just like he has. I think I have 8 or 9 pieces of his work, and all of them are just absolutely jaw-dropping. But so those are up there. And then also there's like a lot of art that is like reader submitted that I love. I have a number of pieces of envelope art from Nintendo Power where mostly children, would draw on envelopes and submit them to Nintendo Power, and they would have a very small chance of being published and I have a number of pieces of that art, and that is by and large the hardest things to find. Like, look, all of this is god tier like difficulty, right? But
Yeah.
like sub tiers within that level of difficulty, the envelope art is among the hardest things to find because Nintendo never sent that back to children. So
I did not know that.
in order to have found any of it, it would have had to make its way out of the building by other means. And so, unlike contracted artwork, which they were actually mandated, unless Nintendo paid an extra fee to keep the art, which they almost always never did. Or almost never did. Almost always never did. That was a silly thing to say. Always never did. Then they would have to ship it back to the artist, or they were supposed to ship it back to the artist. But the envelope art they specifically never shipped back to the artists, so it's incredibly difficult to find.
Because I remember seeing bits of the envelope art, and it reminded me very much, because back when I was collecting comic books, I was collecting still am. I love Sonic the Hedgehog.
Okay.
And I would be reading the old Archie comics, and on the back of the issue, they would always have fan art that kids have submitted.
Sure.
And I mean, sometimes it's even nowadays in the IDW pages, they still have bits and pieces of like fan art that fans submit. And once again, there's times where the art is like, really, really good. And there are times where it's like, obviously a 3-year-old drew this. Nothing against the 3-year-old. It's just, I'm just glad that they were able to send it in, and they're like, I love Sonic, here you go. But I definitely love seeing the envelope art. Like when you were mentioning it, as because I saw that, I was like, I never knew Nintendo Power did that, to be perfectly honest. I had no clue. And the fact that they never sent it back is like, yikes.
Yeah, there was the section was called Player's Pulse, and they would answer letters, like just normal letters. They would answer questions and stuff, but then also they would publish envelope art, and usually there was around 10 pieces of art per issue that they would publish, which also means that there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pieces that they didn't publish, and it's most likely lost to time, which is heartbreaking.
Probably. Have you ever met or has someone ever come up to you at a convention, point at an envelope and said, how did you get that? That's mine. Has someone ever done that?
Never in person.
Okay.
Several times online.
Okay.
And before you ask, they've never asked for it back, which is nice, because that would be a very difficult conversation, honestly, because I pay for this art most of the time, and usually it's not a small amount of money, and so it would be a difficult conversation from that perspective. But so far, they've only just been absolutely thrilled that their art is part of the exhibit, and that they're able to see it again. And I will always like give them high res scans or whatever, like, and if I if someone really wanted something back, we would cross that bridge when we came to it. I'm not saying that I wouldn't figure something out, but like, would it be my preference? No. But would I be open to conversation? Sure. But and some of that has spawned other projects. Like I've had people who have drawn for the magazine then draw things for me for the exhibit. Our Howard and Nestor, if you look at our banners at any of the exhibits, or honestly, it's also the thumbnail to my Twitter account. It's a drawing of Howard and Nestor, and that was drawn by the same artist who drew the last issue of Nestor's Adventures in the last issue of Nintendo Power.
Oh wow.
Bill Mudron. And so yeah, or I have one of the, so there was a contest in Nintendo Power to, was it Mega Man 4 or 5? There was a contest in Nintendo Power to draw a Robot Master, and they actually made Nightman and Windman, Night with a K, were from that contest, where they were they were redrawn by an actual artist, obviously, but they were based off of designs that children had submitted. And I have now found a number of, I say children, but they're now obviously in their 40s. I've found a number of people who drew Mega Man villains for that contest, and then I'm working on this project now that I'm gonna debut hopefully either this year or next year, where I've had a number of them redraw the Mega Man villain that they submitted to the magazine, only now with the 35 years worth of skill that they have acquired. And so I'm gonna put up a because I don't have the original art obviously for the Mega Man contest because I didn't send that stuff back. But I'm gonna put together an exhibit where you can see side by side the new drawing from that same artist that they drew when they were 8 or younger.
That I would love to see that. I mean, I'm also a big Mega Man fan. I think I remember hearing about that contest. I mean, obviously not when it happened because Mega Man 3 came out long before I was born. Yeah. But I do remember like watching YouTube videos and they would talk about it, like, oh yeah, some kids were picked from a draw Mega Man villain contest, and that's how some of the Robot Masters were created. I'm like, oh, that's neat. But even seeing some of the like what little art did survive that has been circling or at least photos of said art have been circling the internet, those are some really cool designs. And I would love to see how, like, yeah, I drew this when I was a child. Look at the glow up now. Now I can only imagine maybe. Oh, sorry.
Some of them did not become artists, but actually a surprising number of them did become career artists. And so the glow up is significant.
I bet. I 100% believe that. And now I really want to go to Arizona. Are you going to premiere in Arizona, or is it?
I'm not sure right now. Framing is very expensive. It's actually the biggest expense that we have, and so usually, like I have of the 360, what did I say before? 364, 367, something like that. I have probably 200 pieces that are framed. Okay. And so that stuff is it's on the pile, right?
Right.
To be framed, and because I can't show anything publicly that's not framed, mostly from a security perspective, because it's much harder to walk out the door with a frame than it is to roll something up and put it in your pocket. So so I generally won't show anything unless that it's either under glass or in a frame. And it's just the framing takes. I mean, the physical framing process does take time too, but also just like basically all of my spare income goes towards framing. Again, we are a nonprofit, but our biggest contributor to our organization monetarily is me. So so yeah, until we get to the point where we are actually having. And usually, I'll go to a show and we'll get like a couple $100 or something like that, which is great. It'll help pay for the show, honestly, like, because I got to feed Chris, and then I gotta pay for the truck, and although usually, unless it's a very, very small show, usually the show will pick up the tab on the truck, which is nice.
That's good.
But yeah.
All right. Well, we're coming up on time for this episode, but there is one more thing I want to talk to you about real quick. Sure. So earlier you mentioned about how the art of the entire exhibit of Art Nintendo Power is dealing with the hand-drawn aspects of the magazine, pre-polygons, pre-N64. This is a bit of a two-parter. Will there ever be a moment where you will start accepting and displaying computer-generated images and art, or when you finally get all the artifacts that you can, like say because there's obviously a finite number of artifacts and paintings from Nintendo Power going up to a certain issue. Say in a perfect world, you're able to get it all. Are you willing to stop, or are you going to be like, you know what? I said this once, but other people worked on these, even though they're pre-rendered 3D images, let's put them in because it still has to deal with Nintendo Power as a whole.
So first, there's no way on earth that I would ever be able to identify when I was done.
Okay.
Because X amount. First of all, the first X amount of issues were done by a company called Tokuma Shoten, a Japanese publisher, and so like a lot of the early, which is why you probably notice a pretty significant change in design after the first couple years of Nintendo Power, where they started to have American artists working on it. But in the beginning, it was almost, except for the cover artist, all of the interior work was almost exclusively done by Japanese artists.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese art is incredibly difficult to source for a number of reasons. Obviously, language barrier, geographic barrier, but also there's, I have found that Japanese artists of a certain age, there's one of the challenges is that there's a sort of a point of, this art is made by Japanese artists. It's for the Japanese. We're going to keep it in Japan. There's a little bit of that, and which is fine, right? Totally fine. But so there's a significant amount of Japanese art that I will never find, likely. But then also, just all up, I have no idea what's been destroyed. There's no way that I would be able to track that. So and I sure know it's not zero, right? So I'm never concerned about reaching that definition of done, because I would never be able to know when I had both these conditions would have to be true. I would have to know that I had everything that had existed, but I would also need to have a very organized list of what's been destroyed. And that second thing is literally impossible. And so yeah, I'm not worried about the definition of done. Going back to the first part of your question about digital art, yes, and we already do. There are several pieces. What am I thinking? The one of the Mortal Kombat covers, and the Stargate cover. There's a Stargate 64 cover. Those were both done digitally. I think it was either Mortal Kombat 3 or Ultimate Mortal Kombat. Anyway, those were both done digitally, and so the only reason that those exist is because the artist happened to print out a couple copies and then put those in his personal portfolio, and I was able to buy his portfolio. That was until I scanned it and put it on Twitter. That was the only physical copy of that art in existence. The thing that makes digital art actually more challenging than physical art is that if you pick a painting and stick it in a drawer for 35 years, it's going to still be that painting. If you put a hard drive in a drawer for 35 years, the likelihood of that hard drive still functioning is probably pretty slim. And so most of the digital artists that I have talked to were like let me go check some hard drives, and they come back and be like, sorry, they're all dead, or sorry, that was 10 computers ago, why would I have any of that? Those are the challenges with digital art, is that they're ephemeral. And so unless someone archives them in a secure way or physically prints them, the likelihood of those things still existing are very, very slim. So I would be happy to display digital art. It's just so exceedingly rare that we only have I think 3 pieces of digital art in the archive.
Oh wow, only 3? Because I mean, because for me growing up, whenever stuff digitally came about, especially when when games started to make the push from physical to digital, where it's like, oh, you could just buy games digitally, they'll be on your hard drive. I do remember a lot of conversation and the fear of us losing our hard drives and just hard drives just going. The fear wasn't there back then. Now that thankfully we know a whole lot better, that is actually, to me, that sounds surprising, because you would think that the digital stuff would be easier to store, but like you said, the artists they worked on it like 10 computers ago. It's long gone.
Right. Because also this was pre-cloud, right? This was not pre-internet, but like widely used internet, and definitely pre-cloud. And so it's not like today where we have, living, breathing digital archives online. It was literally just whatever they had, likely locally, and or like, I guess there's a non-zero chance that Nintendo has some of it archived, but like, while Nintendo has been wonderful to me from a basically the deal we have is I don't make money on their IP and they don't sue me into the ground. Like that's good, right? Like I'm happy with that arrangement.
Yeah.
But as far as knowing what's in their archive, that's not a conversation that I have been able to have. Obviously, that's something that I would love to have, and I would love to be able to, on some timeline, do something officially with Nintendo. Doing an exhibit with them would be, that would be, a career aspiration, obviously.
Oh yeah.
But like, I don't know. I mean, that's a third piece of like why I'll never know what's when I'm done, is that I assume that there's a non-zero amount of this art. I mean, I know for sure, like the first party art, the stuff that like Nintendo, like when the Super Mario World cover, that's just like literally the art that they did for the box on the cover. And so like that kind of stuff, the first party art, I know for sure they have, or at least likelihood that they have. But I don't know what else they might have in their own archive. So
well, as you said, this is this year marks the 35th anniversary of Nintendo Power. Hopefully they call you soon. That would be pretty sweet if you ask me.
I would be lying if I said that I wasn't trying actively. So
all right. Well, Stephan, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to talk to me about this. This has been an absolute blast. And I want to say I'll see you in Phoenix, but I can't guarantee that. But you will 100% be at Game On Expo in Phoenix, Arizona, correct?
I will. We're doing, so I know for sure I'm doing 3 shows, and then sometimes, something will pop up, like a local show. Like there's a, I live in Simi Valley, California, so there's a local Simi show that I do sometimes. But definitely doing Portland, definitely doing Game On, and definitely doing SAC Gamers Expo this year in Sacramento. So and it's December 17th. I think is when that is, because that's right, because that's also my wedding anniversary to my current wife. So that's why I know that not off the top of my head. But yeah, so that's December 17th. So I'll definitely be doing those 3 shows this year, and then maybe more stuff.
Awesome. Well, if anyone's listening and they're going to those 3 shows, keep an eye out. It's amazing. Like I said before, it really is an amazing exhibit. You're going to see stuff there that you will not see anywhere else. And thankfully, pictures are totally awesome to take, because I was taking, every time I see the exhibit, my phone's out going to snapping as many photos as I can.
Yeah, it's all behind museum glass, so or museum plexi. So there's very little harm that can be done to them. So please take pictures. But also, I would say, if I'm not at a show that's a favorite of any of your listeners, like, let those organizers know that I exist, and that maybe we can work something out. I'm always open to new shows. So yeah, the best way to find me for that is probably just hitting me up on Twitter. And that's Art of Nintendo Power is the one that I generally frequent, or it's at Art of NP. That's usually the best way to get a hold of me. There's other stuff like through the Interactive Art Collection. You could also interactiveartcollection.org. You can also find me that way. But the easiest one is through Twitter.
All right.
Until Elon blows it all up.
Yeah, yeah. I shudder to think about that. To be perfectly honest, because I owe so many like connections through Twitter.
Yeah.
Like obviously I saw your art collection in person, but then then one day I saw your Twitter account. I was like, oh shit, he has a Twitter account. Click follow, and then 20 minutes later, it's like, what do you mean they followed me back? What did I do?
Yeah.
Okay. That's neat.
Yeah, Twitter social in general, but Twitter specifically is a very big part of what I do. So I would be very bummed from a very like it would have a direct impact on my museum if Twitter blew up. Yeah, because like likelihood, because again, most of the people that I'm finding are of a certain age, so like they're not going to be jumping to the next popular social network, right? It's like if they are on social, they're on the very established social networks, right? And so Twitter is obviously a big one. Facebook obviously a big one.
Yeah.
Right. So if either of those two blew up, there would be a direct negative, significant impact to what I do.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But thankfully that hasn't happened yet. Don't fuck it up, Elon.
That's right.
Yeah, fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But anyways, Stephan, once again, thank you so much. Yes, listeners, follow the Art Nintendo Power on Twitter. Go see him at the shows. If you want this amazing exhibit at your show, contact the organizers of said show. Be like, hey, this dude is like really awesome. And we're only a few states away from California. This is an easy enough drive to get out there.
Yeah, it's generally it's the 24 hours is usually my cutoff. If I can drive it in 24 hours one way, then I'm open. It's once I get to the multi-day driving that it gets extra challenging.
Yeah, East Coasters, good luck.
Yeah, look, I my desire is to retire into this sometime. So when I am able to retire, I'd like to do this full time, and then at that point, y'all will be seeing me on the East Coast. Or if it's something really special, there's a world in which I would have to like basically bank my vacation time, right? But like, and so there would be some strategy that would go into that. But for something really specific, like certainly if Nintendo wanted to do something in the New York store, like that's where I think if something happened between us, the likelihood it would happen there. Then I would absolutely like make that happen. But yeah, the East Coast stuff is very challenging.
Yeah, but hey, East Coasters, let me rephrase: not good luck. Be patient. Just wait. It's gonna happen sometime.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyways, yeah. So once again, follow Stephan, follow our Nintendo Power, and of course, you can follow this show on Twitter at Baseball Arcade Plasman. You can follow me, BenMac27, everywhere. Fake Nerd Podcast is Mothership Show. FakeNerdPodcast.com. You all know. Listeners should know that already. Stephan, once more, thank you again so much for being here. It has been an absolute blast.
Yeah, this was great. Anytime.
Yeah, I can't wait to see you again at a convention. And until next time, unpause.